Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at the rituals of worship presented in Leviticus chapters 1 through 7. Bellinger says that Leviticus does not articulate a theory of sacrifice, but simply describes a variety of sacrifices. That's actually how the book begins. We jump right into the description of the sacrificial system. Now, what takes place in a sacrifice? First of all, there's a principle of a gift. A gift is being brought to the Lord. It's being offered up to Him. Secondly, there's the principle of a death. Now, not all sacrifices are necessarily going to involve death, but the basic sacrifices will involve the death of an innocent substitute. And that brings up the third principle. There's a principle of a substitute, where one thing is being substituted for another. If an animal is being sacrificed, he is dying in my place. And finally, there's the principle of a healed relationship. The need for a sacrifice says that there's a broken relationship between myself and God, and that needs to be healed through the gift, through the death, but especially through the substitute of the one who's being the animal, the one who's being substituted in my place. Now, chapters 1 through 5 give us a number of various offerings. We begin with the basic sacrifice, the burnt offering, or I like to call it just the ascending offering, but it's burnt. It's going up in smoke, as it were. Secondly, the grain offerings, the peace offerings. Those are the ones that are offered in worship. And then two that are offered because of guilt, the sin offering and the guilt offerings. And that's going to take us from chapter 1 all the way to chapter 5. Then in chapter 6, we'll focus on the priest's actions in the offering of the rituals, and we'll also speak of the disposal of the offering after it's been offered. So chapters 6 and 7 are going to look at the priest's role, and that will take us into the next section that we'll look at next time, which will be laws concerning the priesthood. Now, why are there 5 different sacrifices if they all represent Jesus? And they do. It's a little bit like looking at a diamond that has been already sculpted. There are many different facets to that. And likewise, these sacrifices, they spotlight the different aspects, the different facets of the ministry of Jesus. We begin with the burnt offerings. This is it's an offering that did not originate here in Leviticus. Actually, we first read about a burnt offering in Genesis chapter 8, verse 20, where Noah offers burnt offerings after the flood. The offering of Isaac was designed to be a burnt offering, but remember, God stopped Abraham from offering Isaac, and instead a ram caught in a thicket was offered in his place. The worship of the golden calf involved burnt offerings and peace offerings, so they were there as well. This was the basic offering. The burnt offering, like I said, I call it the ascending offering. It was the morning and evening offerings. Every morning, right after the sun had come up, before it had gotten to the position of noon, and then just before the sun goes down in the evening, this was an offering that preceded the time of prayer. And there were also burnt offerings at various feast days that would be given. It was to be completely consumed by the fire. That is, it was an offering that was burnt up, and that's why I call it the going up offering. The entire offering went up in smoke. Various types of animals were allowed in the burnt offerings. There could be a bull, a sheep, or a goat, or birds, depending on the financial status of the person making the offering. So Leviticus chapter 1, verse 1, Then the Lord called to Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting. And here we are. We're going to the tent of meeting. We're going to the tabernacle. And the entire story, the entire book of Leviticus, is going to take place here. Then the Lord called to Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting, saying, Speak to the sons of Israel, and say to them, When any man of you brings an offering to the Lord, you shall bring your offering of animals from the herd or the flock. If his offering is a burnt offering from the herd, he shall offer it, a male without defect. He shall offer it at the doorway of the tent of meeting, that he may be accepted before the Lord. If his offering, and notice that term offering, from the Hebrew word korban, Remember, there's a reference to that term korban in the New Testament, where there were those who were saying, I can't take care of my parents because I've taken all my money and I've brought it to the Lord. It comes from the root word karav, to come near. And so this offering, if his offering is a olah, a burnt offering, an ascending offering, it comes from the root word Allah, to ascend, from the herd, then he's to offer it without defect, and so on. He shall lay his hand on the head of the burnt offering, that it may be accepted for him to make atonement on his behalf. So that there is a transfer. You'll lay hands upon the animal to transfer the identity of that animal. He shall slay the young bull before the Lord, and Aaron's son the priest shall offer up the blood and sprinkle the blood around on the altar that is at the doorway of the tent of meeting. There's another altar inside the altar, inside the tabernacle. That's not the altar for sacrifices. The one outside the tabernacle, that's the one for these sorts of sacrifices. The sons of Aaron and the priest shall put fire on the altar and arrange wood on the fire. Again, we're going to see where the fire comes from a little bit later. Then Aaron's son, the priest, shall arrange the pieces, the head and the sweat, over the wood which is on the fire, that is on the altar. Its entrails, however, and its legs he shall wash with water, and the priest shall offer up in smoke all of it on the altar for a burnt offering, an offering by fire of a soothing aroma to the Lord. Notice that soothing aroma. You were not only to see the offering, hear the offering, feel the offering, you were to smell the offering. And it was to be an offering that made peace with God, a sweet-smelling offering. Which means that God's acceptance, think about this, God's acceptance smelled like cooked steak. Next time you go into a place and you smell the odor of cooking steak, it should remind you of an offering to the Lord. Therefore, be imitators of God, Paul says in Ephesians chapter 5, as beloved children, and walk in love, just as Christ also loved you and gave himself up for us, an offering and a sacrifice to God as a fragrant aroma. The sacrifice of Jesus was a fragrant aroma before the Lord. And we are to live accordingly. So in the burnt offering, notice when any man brings an offering, that's in verses 1 and 2, and then we have the instructions for the offering of a bull from the herd, a sheep or goat from the flock, or a bird, turtle dove, or a young pigeon, and the regulations are given very specifically for all the different types of offering in the burnt offering. It was a foundational offering that allowed men to come into the presence of the Lord. Leviticus chapter 1 verse 3, he shall offer at the doorway of the tent of meeting, that he may be accepted before the Lord. Verse 4, he shall lay his hand on the head of the burnt offering, that it may be accepted for him to make atonement on his behalf. This was the basic offering that allowed you to come into the presence of God. A life had been offered upon the altar, and now that life was consumed and the carcass was burned up. It was to be completely burnt upon the altar. Depending upon the financial status of the one making the offering, it could be a bull, a lamb, or a dove. The poorer you were, the lesser of that category it would be. We read in the Cornerstone Commentary that physical contact with the animal shows that there was no worship by proxy or at a safe distance. The worshiper personally carried out over half the ritual steps, more than the priest did. So you got physically involved in the carrying out of the sacrifice. You couldn't worship God at a distance. You had to be up close and personal to do that. So Leviticus chapter 1, we have the burnt offerings. Next we come to chapter 2 with the grain offerings. This could be flour, oil, incense, and whereas the burnt offering was for atonement, this was a celebratory offering. So Leviticus chapter 2 verse 1, now when anyone presents a grain offering as an offering to the Lord, his offering shall be of fine flour, and he shall pour oil on it and put frankincense on it. A grain offering, a minshka, an offering, a tribute. This is used in Genesis chapter 4 of both Cain and Abel's offerings. Even so, it doesn't have to be a grain offering, but it was here in the way it's described in the context. The grain offering was the unbloody offering, or it could be at least, and that's the way it's described here in this chapter. It describes the king's tribute. That is, the king deserves an offering, and God is king. And so we bring that which he deserves. It's connected to the idea of hospitality, where I would show hospitality to anyone, but especially to a visiting monarch. And it was to be made without leaven or honey. That is, it doesn't have the additional sweetener, and it doesn't have that which represents influence, that is leaven. It's made without those things. Part of the offering went to the Lord, and the rest went to Aaron and to his sons, because they are fed by the offerings. It was to be seasoned with salt as a salt covenant. And this reminds us that Jesus is a grain offering. He is the bread of life. He was born in Bethlehem. He was born in the house of bread. We go from the grain offering. Next, chapter 3 is the peace offering. It could involve a male or female cattle or sheep, and this was a rejoicing offering. Leviticus chapter 3 verse 1, now if his offering is the sacrifice of peace offerings, he is going to offer out of the herd, whether male or female, he shall offer it without defect before the Lord. A peace offering, a zabach, that's the word for offering, shalom, or in this case, shalomim, but it's that same word for peace that we usually say shalom. A peace offering. He shall lay his hand on the head of his offering, and slay at the doorway of the tent of meeting, and Aaron's son the priest shall sprinkle the blood on the altar. And again we have this picture of imputation. You put your hand on the head of the offering, identifying the offering with yourself. In the peace offering, it could be from the herd of cattle or the flock of sheep or goats. It could be male or female, and the fat of the animal as well as the entrails were to go to the Lord. The flesh went to the priest and to the one making the offering. You see, the peace offering was a meal, and everybody got to eat. Part goes to the Lord, part goes to the priest, and part goes to the one making the offering. Everyone ate a portion of the offering, signifying communion with God. You ate a meal with the Lord. And of course, Jesus is our shalom, he is our peace, and he invites us to a table to eat with him. He is the offering, but he invites us also to come and eat with him and to commune with him. When we sit at the table, we meet him. The peace offering was generally accompanied by a libation of wine. And remember what happened when Jesus offered his Last Supper. He gave bread and he gave wine. And he gave himself. So that he is our peace offering. Next we have in Leviticus chapter 4, the first of the offerings for things going wrong, a sin offering. This could be a bull, a goat, male or female, for unintentional sin. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the sons of Israel, saying, if a person sins unintentionally, he's not premeditated, gee, I'm going to go out and... He sins unintentionally in any of the things which the Lord has commanded not to be done, and commits any of them. If the anointed priest sins so as to bring guilt on the people, then let him offer to the Lord a bull without defect as a sin offering for the sin he has committed. Notice, if the anointed priest sins, he shouldn't be sinning, but if he does, if the anointed priest sins, then, and that's in verses 1 through 12, Next, verses 13 through 21, if the people sin, verses 22 through 26, if the leader sins, and finally, if one of the common people sins. So it's really covering every possible circumstance. He is to bring the bull to the doorway of the tent of meeting before the Lord, and shall lay his hand on the head of the bull and slay the bull before the Lord. Then the anointed priest is to take some of the blood of the bull and bring it to the tent of meeting, and the priest shall dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle some of the blood 7 times before the Lord in front of the veil in the sanctuary. So it's actually to go into the sanctuary before the very presence of God, still outside the veil, and sprinkled 7 times before the Lord. The priest shall also put some of the blood on the horns of the altar of the fragrant incense. There was another altar inside the tabernacle, the altar of incense, and blood was to be applied to the horns of this altar in the tent of meeting. And all the blood of the bull he shall pour out at the base of the altar of burnt offering, which is at the doorway of the tent of meeting. But the hide of the bull, and all its flesh with its head and its legs and its entrails and its refuse, that is, all the rest of the bull, he is to bring out to a clean place outside the camp where the ashes are poured out, and burn it on wood with fire. Where the ashes are poured out, it shall be burned. So the idea is the sin now imputed to the bull is taken with the bull and burned outside the camp. Do you remember where Jesus died? He died outside the camp. Outside the camp. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 11, for the bodies of those animals whose blood is brought into the holy place by the high priest as an offering for sin are burned outside the camp. Therefore, Jesus also, that he might sanctify the people through his own blood, suffered outside the gate. So let us go out to him outside the camp, bearing his reproach. You see, there were people in the book of Hebrews who were being tossed out of the synagogue for having believed in Jesus. And the writer says, that's okay. Jesus went outside the camp. You go outside the camp too, because that's where you meet him. Finally, we have the sin offering. The sin offering, now the first 3 offerings were offered as acts of worship. This offering is made for an atonement of sin. We had the guilt, and now the sin offering. The first 3 offerings were burnt upon the altar in the compound of the temple. This offering, like the guilt offering, is to be burnt on the bare earth outside the camp. It teaches us the great cost of sin. Sin always costs. And it teaches us that sin can be both ignorant and willful. It teaches us that sin can be active, it can be passive, it can be something I do or something I should have done that I don't do. And it teaches us that the only solution to sin is the death of an innocent substitute. Well, I guess you could say the death of the sinner, but aside from that, there's the death of the innocent substitute, which is why we needed one to die in our place. We needed a substitute. We needed Christ to die for us. So we have the sin offering, and finally we have the guilt offering. This is a ram or equivalent sum, and this is an offering for atonement. The guilt offering, this offering is the only one not described as a soothing aroma. It includes the mandate of a financial recompense to the party that was wrong. So not only do you offer the sacrifice, you also, if you did something wrong to somebody else, you pay them back for it. Both the sin and the guilt offerings are for unintentional offenses. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, when a person sins and acts unfaithfully against the Lord and deceives his companion in regard to a deposit or a security entrusted to him, or through robbery, or if he has extorted from his companion, or has found what was lost and lied about it and swore falsely, so that he sins with regard to any one of the things a man may do, then it shall be when he sins and becomes guilty, he shall restore what he took by robbery, or what he got by extortion, or the deposit which was entrusted to him, or the lost thing which he found, or anything about which he swore falsely. He shall make restitution in full and add to it 1/5 more. So there's actually a penalty for having gone through the process. He shall give it to the one to whom it belongs on the day he presents his guilt offering. So he presents the offering to the Lord, but he also presents restoration plus I guess you could call it interest, back to the one he wronged. So we have the various offerings, the ones in worship, the ones because of sin, and now we come to focus on chapter 6 and 7 on the priest's actions in the offering ritual, and we look at the disposal of the offering after it's been offered. So Leviticus chapter 6 verse 8, then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, command Aaron and his sons, saying, this is the law for the burnt offering. The burnt offering itself shall remain on the hearth, on the altar until all night, until the morning, and the fire on the altar is to be kept burning on. The priest is to put on his linen robe, and he shall put on undergarments next to his flesh, and he shall take up the ashes to which the fire reduces the burnt offering on the altar, and place them beside the altar. Then he shall take off his garments, and put on other garments, and carry the ashes outside the camp to a clean place, because this is going to be a defiling thing. So in chapter 6 verse 8 we have the law for the burnt offering and how that's to be disposed with. The ashes are carried out by the priest to a clean place. In verses 14 through 18 we have the law for the grain offering, and the grain offering is going to be there at the anointing of Aaron. We have the law for the sin offering, and the blood must be drained or burned with fire, that's specified. We have in chapter 7 verse 1 the law for the guilt offering, and the blood is applied around the altar. And finally in chapter 7 verse 11 the law for the peace offering, in which it is to be eaten on the day of the offering. This then, chapter 7 verse 37, this is the law of the burnt offering, the grain offering, the sin offering, the guilt offering, and the ordination offering, and the sacrifice of the peace offerings, which the Lord commanded Moses at Mount Sinai in the day that he commanded the sons of Israel to present their offerings to the Lord in the wilderness of Sinai.